So first of all, welcome to the webinar, Getting Started with Gatsby, Building Your Portfolio Site. We have a couple of really exciting speakers as well as some guest speakers today. But first, a few announcements. The webinar will be recorded, so it will be sent to all registrants and posted on Twitter after the live webinar. So if there's anything that you missed, you can go ahead and access the recording on our website a little bit later today. The recording will also have closed captioning, so if there's anything that you missed there and it's easier to read it, you'll be able to access that on the recorded webinar. All the attendees are on mute, so if you do need to chat with us or especially submit a question, please do that through the Q&A window on the GoToWebinar app. And we will make sure that either we have time to answer questions today or we'll answer them throughout the webinar. Okay, and with that, we're going to get started. And let me just introduce our great speakers today. So Jason Lengstorf will be joining us. He's head of developer relations at Gatsby. And Jason is head of developer relations. He's also a human duct tape, which you can ask him about sometime. He's a regular keynote speaker and an occasional bartender. Jason has done a lot of live streams, a lot of training, and we're really excited to have him here today. We also have Tiffany White joining us. Tiffany has been working with front-end technologies like JavaScript and React for several years. She is an instructor at Egghead and writes on her blog at tiffanyWhite.tech. And we're also going to hear from Nathan Leon. Nathan is a front-end engineer based in Washington, D.C., who loves CSS, React, and gelato. I think that's a great combination. And when not coding, you will probably find him hanging out with his dog Renly or watching Brooklyn 999. Actually, that's just 2 nines, Brooklyn 99. All right. And with those short intros, I'm actually going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to give us an overview of Gatsby. So let me pass the controls.
All right. Hello, everyone. And I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Linda. So the first thing I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about portfolios and Gatsby. And so when you start thinking about your portfolio, the thing about it is that your portfolio is your resume. Like, portfolio sites today tend to carry more weight than a piece of paper that you would hand into a business. But your portfolio is also your business card. It's what you're going to send people. You know, I don't know about you, but I haven't had a business card in years. Instead, I just give people a link to my website. So in a lot of ways, your portfolio becomes your first impression, which means that it's the first thing people are going to see about you. They're going to Google you and they're going to find your website. And you want to own that first impression. You don't want your first impression to be something like LinkedIn. Why let them control that experience when you could control it yourself? A portfolio is also a place to learn and experiment. It's a low risk environment where you can try something new. And if it doesn't work, no big deal. Take it down and try something else. And if it does work, you've now learned a new skill that you can apply elsewhere. And it's a place where you can show off. Like, do you know how to do animation, but you can't get a client to give you the money to do like a cool animation? Do it on your portfolio. Show off that you can do that. You can do illustrations. You can do some kind of cool JavaScript interaction. Anything that you've learned that you're proud of, you can work it into your portfolio, and that's a great way to do things. But a lot of times, portfolios end up being hard. Almost everybody I know in tech has a recurring joke where they'll say, "Oh, I've been working on my portfolio site." And you're like, "Cool, how long?" I don't know, 15 years. And we want to make sure that that's not the case. So in our estimation, we believe that you can build a portfolio site in a few minutes, which I'll show you later in the webinar today. But it can look really professional. Like, you don't have to slap something together and feel like you just like put it up there to be done with it. You can do something very fast that is really high quality, and you can do that using Gatsby. So to talk a little bit about how Gatsby works, Gatsby is a system of kind of node APIs under the hood that will load data from anywhere into GraphQL. And we use GraphQL to normalize that data so that we can, this is kind of a technical term, but early bind that data at build time. And what that means is we'll pull the data in from all sorts of different places and we'll stick it into templates so that you don't need to have a server running when your site is served. We use this to generate static assets, which means you can host it anywhere. You can put it on Netlify, Amazon S3, Google Cloud Storage, whatever you want. We'll automate the performance tuning of this as we generate so that you get a really, really fast website right out of the box. And it's then deployable to any CDN that you want, which means that your site is really close to the people who are using it, and it loads very, very quickly. And probably most importantly, this rehydrates to a React app once it gets to the browser, meaning that you've got a fully interactive website as soon as it hits the client, the browser. And that means you can do anything that you could do with a React app inside of it. So this is kind of, I just threw a lot of terms around. So to visualize this a little bit, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the right thing the easy thing. Gatsby is designed so that if you are basically doing the bare minimum amount of work to get a site up, your site is going to be high performance and pleasant to use. And we do that by optimizing a lot of things under the hood. If you've ever heard different performance terms thrown around like the purple pattern or code splitting or bundle optimization, those sorts of things all happen automatically inside of Gatsby. So by default, you're going to get something that's going to score really, really well on performance tests, which means that people, even on bad connections or mobile phones, are going to get a really, really fast load time. Visually, what this looks like is your data can come from anywhere. So, here we've got GraphQL, Contentful, WordPress. You could do a REST API. You could pull from regular JSON files or Markdown, and that all gets pulled into Gatsby. Then you use React and GraphQL to pull data in and build out components that use that data. We then compile that down to static assets, and you can put that on S3, Netlify, whatever CDN you want. And ultimately, that ends up in the browser as a React app. So that's kind of a really, really fast crash course in how Gatsby works. We'll actually dive in and look at that a little bit later in the webinar. But for now, I'm going to hand it back over to Linda.
Thanks, Jason. Well, we brought Tiffany and Nathan on because we want them to share the great work that they've done on their portfolio site. So I'm actually going to pass the controls over to Tiffany and have her tell a little bit more about using Gatsby for her site. You might be on mute still, Tiffany, but we can see your slides.
Oh, okay, here we go. Hello, I use Gatsby and Contentful Starters for pretty much a quick and easy way to get my portfolio site up and running. Previously, my portfolio was a static HTML and CSS site with like a few animations sprinkled in. I used my sort of brand color of Tiffany Blue for the background and some SVGs to different services to link to where I am on the internet. So basically like a landing page with all my links. I use a small animation library to target the text bouncing up as well as the little logo. It was great, but it wasn't eye-catching. It wasn't something that I could look at and be proud of. This is the old. This is a screenshot of the old portfolio that I had. Not bad, but I could do better. I wanted something a bit more eye-catching that could link to all my projects, their repos, and basically showcase my blog posts, which are a key component of who I am as a developer. What would look good, still be fast, and help me get noticed as a dev and ultimately get in reviews. That's what my goals were in creating a newer portfolio. So I basically used Gatsby, and Gatsby uses a stack you're already familiar with, JavaScript, React, and GraphQL. This is a screenshot of my current site. Gatsby is basically a fast static site generator compared with other solutions like Jekyll. So it's fast, flexible, and extensible. I'm not a designer, and I wanted something easy to set up and customize. Gatsby has an ever-increasing selection of starters for you to choose from. Because it is a headless, because using Contentful is a headless CMS, you don't have to use the command line to get something up and running right away. Basically, using Contentful means you can add something to your site or take something away from your site, and it's live right away without having to push and pull content from the command line. Gatsby has a lot of plugins that you can use to make your site look the way you want it to look, to make it more your own. So my goals for creating this newer portfolio was to land interviews, network with companies and other developers. And I'm currently interviewing right now. That was my ultimate goal. It's also letting me network with other developers in the industry, some from large tech companies, some not, but the Gatsby Starter and Contentful are the easiest and quickest way for me to get my portfolio up and showcase the work that I've done and be able to focus on my main projects. And that's it.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. Just a quick reminder, we have a few questions coming in the question chat window, so feel free to submit your questions for either Jason or Tiffany or Nathan in that window. And so now for another example of a portfolio site, I'm going to turn over the controls to Nathan.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, hi everyone, my name is Nathan, and I want to talk about how I built my portfolio using Gatsby. So let's see. So in preparing to build my portfolio, I had a few goals, right? I wanted to quickly build my portfolio. I wanted to be simple and easy, get it up and running quickly. I wanted to use tools that I was familiar with, and I was hoping that in designing a portfolio that stood out, I could get interviews that would hopefully lead to a job. So those are my goals in preparation of building a portfolio. And the reason why I chose Gatsby is because when I first looked into Gatsby, I was really surprised how well the documentation was. So it was really easy to follow along and navigate through the site and understand how to best use it. And I went through the tutorial, and within 30 minutes, I want to say I felt really confident to just start working on my portfolio using Gatsby and just getting right into it. And another thing I noticed in reading about Gatsby is that there were a bunch of plugins. So there was plugins for essentially anything that I could really think of that I would want to use for my site. And there were plugins for everything I specifically needed. And one of those things is I wanted to use Emotion, which is a CSS and JS library, which I used for my last project, and I want to kind of build on that foundational knowledge and keep it going. And sure enough, Gatsby obviously had a plugin for that, so I was able to use that plugin and get my styles in with no issues whatsoever. It was seamless. And I'm going to show you a quick preview or a quick show off of my portfolio. Obviously, I wanted to use my dog for some bonus points. So obviously, like, here's a quick bio about me, and in my projects, you can see my transitions, and then some notes about my experience, the hackathon I did in 2016, and a quick bio over here. So it's pretty simple, but I think it was eye-catching, really stands out. Everyone that I've talked to really likes it, and I'll get to how it's helped me and improved my chances of getting a job in a minute. Let me get my notes back. Okay, great. Full screens. Whoa, my bad. Okay. So in building my portfolio, I used Gatsby, and it was incredibly easy. And some of the things that I really liked about Gatsby is, I think Jason also mentioned, it uses code splitting right out of the box. And in the dev environment, it has hot reloading. So I could view, in Gatsby Develop, I could view all my changes live. So it was incredibly easy just to build my components and then see immediate results. That way I can make quick, small CSS changes as I was going along, right? And also the plugins were essential for me because I wanted to use things like Emotion because that's where I felt the most confident and comfortable. And also, I think Jason also mentioned static rendering. So as soon as it actually outputs the site, it outputs it statically. So I wanted to, in building my portfolio, utilize the tools that I was already familiar with, which includes, React, Emotion, and using a component structure. So in jumping to Gatsby, it was a quick and easy transition. So by using Gatsby, I was able to focus entirely on just the design and implementation, right? So Gatsby did all the heavy lifting behind the scenes for me. I didn't have to worry about tweaking or optimizing performance after I built the site. Through reading and documentation, I was also able to get it quickly up and running and deployed through Netlify, because Gatsby has it has a quick blurb on just how to get that set up. And I want to say it took me all of 30 minutes to get everything up and running, and I think maybe an hour to get the SSL certificate. It's crazy easy. And I recently ran a Lighthouse audit on my portfolio, and the score, let's see if it will show up. You can see it right there, 97 in performance. This is simulated fast 3G, 4 times CPU slowdown, and the other audit I think available is applied fast 3G, same thing. I think at the applied one, it was at 94 in performance, which is still incredible. So I can't really speak any more highly of my experience in using Gatsby, and it was incredibly positive experience thus far. I want to build, my next project is building a blog using Gatsby, and it's one of the main reasons I got interviewed, and also it led to a job opportunity. So I currently work as a front-end engineer at Tagflix, and I was hired, I want to say 3 weeks ago. So one of the reasons I got the interview was because my portfolio stood out so much. So I owe some of that to Gatsby because it made it so easy. I was able to just focus on, like what I said, the design and implementation, and that alone was made it possible for me to stand out from the others and from the rest. So that's it. You can reach out to me over here. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks for sharing that. And actually, a quick question for you came in, and also for Tiffany. Maybe we could just address those real quick. Just wondering, how long did it take for you to build your site?
I can go first. It took me, I want to say I built it in a weekend, right? So I want to say 8 hours maybe total, getting it really just all the tweaks and getting everything perfect. It was just I built it in a weekend and that was it. So it's pretty quick.
Okay, great. And Tiffany, how long did it take you to build your site?
For me, it took a couple hours because I was using Contentful, so everything was basically, I used a starter and then there was Contentful as a backend. So I was able to just get up and running by entering a few things in the Contentful headless CMS, and I was up and running maybe in 4 hours, so not too bad.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, if you have more questions for Nathan or Tiffany, go ahead and submit them in the question window, and we'll either answer them through the webinar or answer them at the end of Jason's next presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason for some live demoing. Okay.
All right. So yeah, what we're going to do next is we're just going to build a portfolio from scratch. And we're going to just do a quick little offering to the demo gods here that this is going to work out all right. So I have just a simple site set up. I pre-installed all of my dependencies to make sure that we didn't run into any network issues. And other than that, we have a JSON file that we're going to use for our data. So each of these is a project. We've got the name of the project, where we want it to live on the website, the URL where the project is actually live, a path to an image of a screenshot for the project, and a short description. And we've got 2 of those in here. We've got our images in a folder alongside the JSON. And in our source folder, all we have right now is a to-do. So if I start this project, all we're going to see at the moment is, once it bootstraps, there we go. All we have in here is this to-do to add code. So let me blow that up a little bit. And so that's not giving us anything. So let's make that actually useful. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to configure our plugins. And in order to load this JSON, we need to do a few things. The first thing is we're going to use the file system to actually read that JSON file. So let me create a new file. I'm going to call it Gatsby config.js. And inside of that, I'm going to export an object. And this is the just the standard config for every Gatsby site. You're going to have a module.exports, and it puts out an object. One of the things that you can put in this object is a plugins array. And we're going to start by getting Gatsby source file system, and we're going to give it some options. And the options that we want are the name, and this is just whatever we want to call it. I'm going to call it project, and a path, which is the path to the data. So from here, then we need to tell the files how to transform the JSON into actual information. So I'm also going to use Gatsby transformer JSON. And after I save this, if I restart the server, what we can see is that if I want to go look at this data now, I have access to our GraphQL layer. So let me open, localhost. Let's go to GraphQL. And inside here, that's a little too big. Let's close this up because we're not using it right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my docs. And so over here, I can see this all projects JSON. So let's look at that. I'm going to do all projects JSON, and it auto completes for me, which is great. And then I'm going to hit option space to see what's available. And one of the things about GraphQL in Gatsby is that we use a format that's comes from one of the original things that Facebook did when they were inventing GraphQL, which is using some terminology from graph theory. So edges and nodes. Don't think too hard about this. A node is the actual thing that we want. So edges are the connections, like think of them as the relationships between things, and nodes are the actual thing. And then inside of this node, if I hit control space again, I can see all the things that are available. And I want, let's say, the title, and let's maybe grab the URL. And if I hit play, we can see now my project, all this data has been loaded from the JSON. But one thing that's a problem here is if I get the image, I can find it, and like we can pull in a public URL. Where is it? Somewhere in here. I'm gonna start typing. There we go. And we have this public URL. So if I take this public URL and I put it in here, we load this image, but look how big this image is. If I pull up the dev tools and I look at the network and we reload this image, I can see this image is 106 kilobytes, and it's just too big for what we need it to be, because what we're actually going to be showing is more of a like a thumbnail. It's going to be much smaller than that. So the next thing we need to do is we need to optimize these images. Now we could do this manually. We could go in and we could create a bunch of different sizes of the images, but that's a pain, and Gatsby will do that automatically. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to add some plugins that will automatically optimize our images. So let's add Gatsby plugin sharp and Gatsby transformer sharp. So the plugin is what will actually transform the images, or what will actually process the images, and the transformer finds image files and turns them into sharp nodes so that we can access the different fields. So let's save that, let's restart, and what we'll see in here is that it's going to start processing our images for us, so that when I come in here now, if I reload, I have a new type. I can do child image sharp. And in here, I can grab, let's do fluid, because that's what we're going to use. And I'm going to grab the source set. And so in this source set, we now have all these different sizes of images. So from 200 pixels wide, so I can take this one, let's go over here and look at it. So there's the 200 pixel version, and then it goes all the way up to this 1280 pixel version. And so I can take this and drop it in, and this is pretty much the original size, right? And so we get this whole array of different image sizes without having to rewrite the whole thing. And so with that, we're actually ready to start building things. So the first thing we want to do is we want to build out a listing of our project pages. And we're going to do that by creating a layout component first. And so to save you from having to watch me write CSS, I wrote the CSS ahead of time. So I'm just going to build out a layout.js component. And inside of that, I'm going to import React from React. I'm going to import Gatsby link from Gatsby. And then I'm going to import our CSS. And importing that CSS just means it is going to get applied to this component. So let's set up the actual layout component here. And React allows you to pass the children into any component, and that's just anything inside. So if we look at, like, I'm going to use a fragment here so we don't add unnecessary markup to the DOM, but here, whatever's inside of this React opening and closing tag, that's what would be passed as children to React fragment. So we're just doing the same thing with layout. And I'm going to put in a header, and I'm going to give this header a class name of header. And we will make a link that's going to go to the home page, and that's for my portfolio. And then outside of the header, we're going to do a main component, call it class name content, and inside of it, we'll put the children. And so what this means for us is once we export this, we now have the ability to wrap anything with a styled layout component that's going to include a header for us. So let's just start by looking at what that does. So let's go in and we're going to import layout from components layout, and then I'm just going to add that layout here. And we'll wrap everything. And so now if we go back and look at our home page, we now have a header and the code is a little more styled. So let's make that useful. So what we're going to need to do that is we need a project preview. And this component is going to be pretty simplified here. Actually, let's start. Yeah, we want a project preview. That's what we want. So we're going to do import React from React. And we're going to import Gatsby link from Gatsby. And then we'll import Gatsby image from Gatsby image. And we're going to create a project preview component. And we want to export default project preview. And the reason that I'm exporting default instead of doing the export default up here is that we want that component to be named in stack traces. So I'm going to give this a class name of project preview. And inside of it, we're going to start by linking to the project. And we can do that by grabbing the slug, which means that our component is going to need to get the slug as a prop. So we're going to put that up here. And inside of this, we are going to link to the image. And that means that we're going to need to have access to this image data. And so we're going to make sure that gets passed as a prop. And for the alt, we're going to use the title because you always want to set an alt tag on your images. So we also need to get the title as a prop. Underneath this, we're going to set up a header, and that is also going to link to our slug. So let me just copy that straight across, and we'll use the title as the content. Let's put the description down here as well, which means that we need to also get the description as a prop. And finally, we will add an actual link calling out that we want to view this content. And so instead of the title, we're going to say view this project. And let's use a right arrow. Okay, So now we have a simplified project preview component, but how do we get the data into here? What we're going to do is go to our home component, this index page, and we need to grab that data. So if you remember, we had in GraphQL this component, this query here that gave us all the things that we needed. So let's write a query that'll give us all the pieces we need. So we need the title, we need the slug, we need the description, not the URL, and we need the image. And this will give us all the pieces that we need. We're also going to use a GraphQL fragment here, but let's not worry about that in graphical because there is a limitation where you can't use fragments. So we're going to grab import GraphQL, and we're going to do what's called a static query to make this work. And we're going to grab this out from Gatsby. And that means that in here, I am going to change this one so that I can put some stuff inside of it. And we're going to grab our data out. Const data equals use static query. And inside, we're going to make a GraphQL call. And I added an extra letter up there, so let me fix that. And in here, I'm going to do a GraphQL fragment. I'm not going to go into how this works today, but if you have questions, please tweet at me and I will help with that. Now we have our data. And so the next thing that we need to do is we want to get our projects out of this data. So we're going to do data.allProjects.json because the data that comes back is this object. So the data.allProjects.json, and then we want the edges. So let's grab the edges as well. Okay, so now we've got those, and inside I can take this and we're going to map over these projects. So I'm going to do a projects.map, and inside of this I'm getting an object and that has the node. So we have an edges, which is an array, and that gives us a node. And I don't want to call that a node because that's confusing to me, so I'm going to alias it to project. And then that means that I can set up a little function, and we're going to map data here. So let's do title equals project title. And there's a reason I'm doing it this way that we'll see a little bit later. The description is going to be project.description. The slug will be project.slug, and the image data will be project.image.childImageSharp.fluid. And so this one's a little gnarly, but that's because we had to do all of this extra image processing. So we're grabbing the image, but then we have to go into that Sharp node that we created with the transformer Sharp, and we want the fluid style of image, which is a whole bunch of data that we're going to use to pass into the project previews image tag. And finally, once we have all that data, we can now use project preview. And I just let, as you can see, VS Code just auto imported that for me, which is a wonderful feature. And I'm going to then give it the data it needs. So it needs the title prop, it needs the description prop, it needs the slug prop, and it needs the image data prop. And once I've saved this, assuming I didn't make any typos, I did. Components project preview. Did I spell something wrong? Okay, let that run. All right, I have screwed something up. Can't resolve React. Oh, I have a typo. I put a space in front of React, so that's fun. Now we're compiled successfully. Let's go back over here, reload, and now we can see our project. So this is wonderful. We got exactly what we wanted, but if I click on this, you can see that page doesn't exist yet. So we need to make sure that this page exists. So let's go back in here, and we are going to create the actual project pages, which I will do by first we're going to create a project component. And that project component is going to be relatively similar to the project preview. So I'm actually just going to start by copy pasting this. And I'm going to rename this to project. So we've got project there. And then I'm going to swap out, we don't need the slug anymore because we actually want to link to the project. And so I'm going to simplify this out a little bit. Let's drop these pieces. We're not going to do the link to the project anymore. We're just going to do an image of it. And we want to put the heading up top now. And we'll make that an H1 since this is now a page about this project. And we don't need it to be a link anymore. So now we've got a heading with our title. We've got an image that just shows the project. We're showing our description. And then instead of linking to the slug, which would be the page on our website, we're going to link to the external URL so that you can view this project online. And finally, because we want a way to get back, let's create a backlink. So we'll do a left arrow and back to all projects. Okay, so this is now ready to be used, but again, we have to get data into it. And the way that you get data into individual pages, so we want this to be a page at like oursite.com/project1. And that means that we need to do a little bit of programmatic page generation. And that might sound scary at first, but don't worry about it. So the first thing we have to do is set up a template, and we're going to call this template projects or project.js. And inside of it, we will import React from React. We're going to import GraphQL from Gatsby. We're going to import our layout from components layout. And we're going to import project that we just created from the components. So the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to get our data. So I'm going to export a query. It doesn't matter what this is called. Gatsby is just going to look for a GraphQL query. And inside of it, we need to figure out how to get individual posts. So I'm going to come in here and let's do this again. So let's look at how to get a project. So I'm going to do projects.projects.json, and I want the slug, and we're going to make sure that slug equals, and let's just start by saying project 1. And inside of that, then I can get the title, the description, the URL, and the image. And again, we're going to want the child image sharp, fluid, and to start, we'll get just the source. Okay, so this gives us our project, but obviously we can't hard code that. So what we're going to need to do instead is set up query variables. And then we can use that query variable here. And that means that we're actually going to need to define a query here. And so now if we run it, we can see project 1, we get project 2, and all we have to change is this variable. And this is how it's going to work inside of Gatsby. So first, we start by setting up this query. And now we have to figure out how do we get that data into this slug. We'll talk about that in just a second. First, let's get the template rolling. So we're going to do the project template, and that's going to be a React component, and it's going to get the data, and that data comes from this query. That's something that Gatsby does at build time, kind of behind the scenes, so you don't have to worry about it. And then we're going to simplify our data a little bit. So let's start by getting the project out. The project is going to be data.projects.json, projects.json, plural. And then we're going to extract the title. So the title is project.title. The description is, can I spell? I can. Project.description. The image data is going to be project.image.child.image.sharp.fluid. And finally, the URL is going to be project.url. And we can return, oops, our components. So we've got a layout, and inside of it, I'm going to use this project that we created, and we're going to feed it the data, title, and description, description, that's what I wanted. Then we can feed it the image data, and finally we can feed it the URL. So now we're ready. Let me export this as well. Export default project template. Okay, so this is now ready to be used to build the pages, but we're not actually building them yet. So let me go ahead and get into our Gatsby node, which is where we will build this project. So if I come in here and I create a new file, Gatsby node.js, I'm going to then export create pages. This is one of Gatsby's APIs, and it passes down a handful of helpers that we're going to use. So the first one is actions. Those are things we can do as GraphQL, as Gatsby builds. Then it gives me a GraphQL helper so that I can make requests, and it gives me a reporter so that I can put things out on the command line if I need to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the results of that query that we wrote, or we're going to write a different query this time. And the query that we want is just all projects JSON, and we're going to do edges, node, and slug. And because remember, what we need in this, let me close some of these, in the project here is we need this slug. And so we have to get that into this template somehow. And so we're going to query that out here so that we can do that. Once we get that result, we're going to check if there's an error. If there's an error, I am going to, for now, just print a message. And let's see, there was a problem loading your projects. And we'll just make sure that it doesn't go any further after that. Assuming there is no problem, we can then grab our projects out, and that's going to be result.data.allprojects.json.edges. And finally, we can loop through those projects.for each. And I'm going to, again, we get the node, but I'm going to alias that to project so that it makes more sense as we use it. I'm going to grab that slug out, and that's going to be the project.slug, if I can spell. And then we're going to use our actions.createPage. Now this one is singular, and what that means is we're creating a single page. So I'm going to create a page at the slug, which is what we want. So that'll give us our site /project-1 for project 1 /project-2 and so on. Then we need to tell it which component to use, and we're going to use require.resolve is a kind of a built-in node thing that will give us the location of a file. So I'm going to use this template that we just built, oh, that's why it's breaking. Source.templates project. And finally, we're going to give it context. Context is what actually gets passed in, and that's what's used in this query. So anything that gets passed into context, whatever the property name is, will be created as a variable. And so we're going to give this the slug. And that means that the slug from the page or from the project will be available in that GraphQL query. And so, having done that, we're going to stop and restart. And this will build. No errors. That means that I didn't typo anything. That's always a good sign. And let's go back out here. I'm going to reload. Okay, so we're close, but I missed something. What did I miss? I forgot to update this. Gatsby, image, sharp, fluid. Let's try that again. And there we go. Now we've got projects. So each of these projects is now working. Let me check for time. All right, so I am going to then take, let's assume now this is all building from JSON. If I wanted to do more, I could just go into my data here and I could add more data. But as you can imagine, over time, that's going to get a little cumbersome. It's going to be hard to use. And so what I wanted to show you, and the reason that I did some of that data abstraction a little bit weird, is because I wanted to show you how simple it is to switch over to a different data source later. And we're going to switch over to a headless CMS called Sanity. It's at sanity.io if you want to look into it a little bit more. I'm not going to talk about how to set up Sanity at all today. Instead, I'm just going to set up a plugin to use it. So to switch over, we can drop everything that we've done because we're not going to use it anymore. And instead, we're going to use the Gatsby source Sanity, and I'm going to give it some options. And the options that I need, I set this up ahead of time, so I already know these. My project ID is that, and my data set is called production. And that's it. This is ready to roll. But we have to change out our GraphQL queries to make this work. And so instead of setting up a JSON, this is now it's going to give me a bunch of errors, but that doesn't matter because what we're looking for right now is the GraphQL. So if I go in here, and I'm just going to clear that out because we're not doing it that way. I'm going to refresh, and now I can do all Sanity project, and we'll get edges and nodes and title, and you can see we're pulling in these projects. So I can come in now and I can make a couple adjustments. So there are a few things that get weird, and the reason that we abstracted our data the way we did will become clear in a second. But so let me take a look at the Gatsby node first. So the first thing that we have to do is the slug in Sanity can be versioned, which means that we want the current slug. Once we get the current slug, we're going to do all Sanity project. And then down here, I'm also going to change this to all Sanity project because we changed our query. And I want the current slug instead. And that's literally the only change that we need to make to get that to work. So then I'm going to go in and change the same thing in my queries here. So I'm going to do all Sanity project. And the slug, we need to be current. And instead of being a sharp, it's going to be Gatsby Sanity image fluid. And down here, we're going to do all Sanity project. We're going to switch this out to be the current slug. And we're going to switch that out to be the asset instead of the sharp image. And let's do the same thing in our template. So we're going to do Sanity project. And let me make sure I get this right because this is the current slug now. And we want to swap this out for asset. And this is now Sanity image instead of sharp image. So we're going to do Sanity project. We're going to use the asset. And down here, nothing else changes. So assuming that I've done all of that right, what we should see is now with just a few lines of code changed, we're now pulling in, oops, oh, I have to stop and restart because I rewrote the Gatsby node. So let's restart. Okay, let me go back here. We're going to refresh. Oh no, I broke something. And what I broke is going to be in Gatsby node here. And I wrote slug slug instead of slug current. Rookie mistake. All right, so let's jump in here. We're going to refresh. And now we have our projects loading in from other CMS. And so if you want to see more of how this works, all the code is up online. It's at github.com/jlangsdorf/demo Gatsby portfolio. You can go take a look at that code. I have each section. I have the start, which is where we started from, the finished JSON powered project, and the finished Sanity powered project. Please take a look, open PRs if you need it. Otherwise, that's all I got. So I'm going to hand it back over to Linda.
Great, thanks, Jason. By the way, can you copy that URL and put it in the chat window for everybody?
You bet.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, we've had quite a few questions come in as Jason's been doing the live demo, and I know that Sam and Kyle have been working to answer those. There are a couple that I wanted to highlight, and then I'll leave it open to Sam and Kyle to highlight any others that they think are maybe reoccurring themes. One was a question around perhaps working with you, Jason, and it reminded me of the pair programming program that we have. If you could just take a minute to talk about that and how somebody could get more involved.
Sure. Yeah, if you want to get more involved, you can go to gatsby.dev/pairing, and we have instructions on. Did my internet just quit on me? Hello?
No, you're still there.
Oh, weird. Okay, so apparently I broke that. Let's go into contributing, and you can find pair programming. That's what we want. Pair programming. Let me post this into the Slack. And that means that you'll be able to pair up with a couple of us on. You'll pair up with somebody for an hour on kind of any Gatsby related questions that you have. Another thing that you can do is I do a weekly live stream on Twitch where you can come follow along as we build out something new. So on tomorrow morning, I'm going to be working with Aaron Parecki from Okta. We're going to add authentication. I'm going to do something with Kent C. Dodds for writing tests. We're going to do some real-time stuff with Asura. We've got all sorts of fun stuff coming up every Thursday. So you can head over to twitch.tv/jlangsdorf and hit this. There's a follow button on there so that you get notified when that goes live. But it's every Thursday, 9 a.m. Pacific. Otherwise, yeah, you can always hit me up on Twitter. I'm at jlangsdorf. And anytime that you have questions, you can always send me a message, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to help.
Great, thanks, Jason. I also saw a lot of questions come up around themes, and does Gatsby have something around theming? And so I'm hoping that either Sam or Kyle can take that one. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'll take it. So we've been working on adding theme support for like the last 6 months or so, and there are a few members of the Gatsby team who are working full time on it and making a lot of great progress. And yeah, so it's still in experimental, kind of experimental stage. We're still playing with different possible APIs and how they'll work exactly. But if you'd like to dive in, we have written a number of blog posts that's on the Gatsby.js blog that you can check out to kind of familiarize yourself. Also, Jason actually has done a great live stream with John Okander, who's one of the people working on them on the Gatsby team, and you can check that out to kind of familiarize with how theme support is going to work. But yeah, so they're very exciting, and you should definitely check them out. They are experimental, so we don't recommend using them for production stuff. But yeah, if you want to play around with them and get going, we'd love to have you participating and kind of figuring out how they're going to work.
Great, thanks, Kyle. There was one question that came up for Nathan that I wanted to get to, but also I'm sharing my screen real quick to make sure that everybody knows where to go to get started building a Gatsby website. Just go to gatsbyjs.org, and from there there's a quick link to get started. There's links to docs and tutorials, so that's how you get started. So Nathan, one question came up for you around what did you use for your animations for your portfolio site?
As far as I can tell, I only have one animation, and that's an arrow that's kind of floating. I just use CSS keyframes, and the clickable interactions between my projects. That's all JavaScript.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wanted to pass it over to Kyle real quickly, since you and Sam have been kind of triaging all the questions that have been coming in. Were there any other consistent questions you saw that you wanted to call out?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about kind of getting started with Gatsby. And so we always recommend that when you're jumping into using Gatsby, that you go through a tutorial. It introduces you to the basics of React and just the basics of using Gatsby. And it's kind of a great introduction into the the Gatsby ecosystem.
Great, thanks. And Sam, any other questions you wanted to highlight?
No, just encourage you if you're thinking of redoing your portfolio site. You have a couple of great examples of great portfolio sites. One of the questions that came up was well, I'm not necessarily a designer, but I do want to build a portfolio site, and I thought that was a great question. And so the question is, well, what should I do then? And I think there's a couple of different options. So we have a starter library as well as a site showcase. So the starter library has you can go to the starter library at gatsbyjs.org/starters and see some portfolio site starters that you can get started with if you want to use those. And those have, so you can start with the code with particular designs. And then you can also go to the site showcase at gatsbyjs.org/showcase. And also you can filter for portfolio there. And you can see some kind of inspirations if you're looking to get inspired for like a design. I think there are like 100 different portfolio sites there. So that's a great way of getting some inspiration.
Great, thanks, Sam. And one question came through about doing Gatsby events in Europe. I know there are community organized events in Europe, and also we will be doing a Gatsby Days conference, most likely in London later this year, probably in September timeframe. So we'll let everybody know about that. Also, if you wanted to view the recordings from our Gatsby Days conference in San Francisco area last December, those recordings are also on our website at gatsbyjs.com. So with that, just a reminder that this webinar is recorded. We will send the link to the recording out to all the registrants later today. And that includes closed captioning as well. So if you didn't catch everything the speaker was saying, that'll make it a little bit easier to catch that. So thanks so much, everyone. Remember to go to gatsbyjs.org to get started on your portfolio site. And then we hope you can join us for the next webinar. Thanks all.